Friendships, love affairs, can you hear me? Friendships, love affairs, and business partnerships can sadly break down when one betrays their partner for their own personal gain. This can be devastating when it happens, and even to the victim that's the most prepared. So it goes beyond saying how important it would be, how valuable, but also how difficult it would be to manage to have a way to see it coming automatically, right? So this is what we're going to try to accomplish in this work, but we're going to try and make it even more difficult, and we're going to try to anticipate betrayal just through the language that the people use when they talk. So in order to tackle such a problem, first we have to make sure we're all on the same page about what it actually means to be betrayed, what betrayal is, and, well, it's clear that betrayal has an element of lying or like hiding the truth, right? So just a person talking or spewing lies, can we consider this a betrayal? For example, somebody writing a fake hotel review, right? Or somebody lying under oath in court, or somebody writing an essay about an opinion that they don't really hold, right? So these kind of things have been explored in the field of deception detection, and there's a lot of interesting work. But to talk about betrayal, we need more of a relationship aspect, right? So how about a conversation? Let's say two people meet, they're strangers, and one of them is lying, but only sometimes. There's been some work on this kind of thing, but it's still not, it doesn't capture what we really want when we say betrayal is something like this. We want an ongoing relationship between people where trust is built, right, and eventually when somebody decides to betray, the trust is broken, the green dinosaur's heart is broken, poor fellow. So this seems like a very involved, very strict kind of setting. Because keep in mind, in order to manage to analyze this, we need not only to know when betrayal takes place in a relationship between two people, but we need to go back in time and see how they interacted as betrayal approached, right? So luckily, we managed to find a setting to do this because people do it for fun all the time. So there is an amazing board game called Diplomacy, also known as the game that ruins friendships, where people betray each other for fun all the time. Diplomacy is a perfect setting for studying betrayal because it's a military strategy kind of world domination board game like Risk and Axis and Allies, but what sets it apart is that there is no element of chance involved, and instead, in order to win at this game, you need to discuss, you need to be persuasive, and you need to build alliances and friendships with others, and eventually, in order to win, you might have to betray them. People play Diplomacy online, which allowed us to get a data set of about 150 games, which might not seem like a big number, but keep in mind that Diplomacy is played out of band, so a game can last 6 months on average, right? And even if this isn't incredibly huge, it's a perfect setting for the controlled kind of scenario of betrayal in a relationship. And let me tell you why. We're going to go through a game of Diplomacy for a little while, so we can see how exactly how it works. Diplomacy is played on a map of Europe, circa 1915, and there are 7 world powers that here are denoted by dinosaurs in order to protect the innocent. Each player has several pieces representing armies occupying territories on the map, right? So let's focus on 2 of them, the brown and the green dinosaurs here. Let's imagine we're in the middle of a game that's been ongoing, and these 2 players have been friends, have been good allies for the better part of the game. And let's say the green dinosaur in Budapest decides it's a good idea to move the army from there to Vienna. But this might be a risky thing to do, right? Because there are other players on the map. And somebody like the orange dinosaur from earlier might want to stop me from moving it to Vienna, right? So what the green dinosaur is going to need to do, since there are no other green armies nearby, is ask for help from his ally. And this actually happens like this in game, via text, via messages, right? So green dinosaur is going to say something like, we need to take Vienna, I suggest you support me in there, right? And the response of the brown dinosaur is, sure, that's a sensible plan. I'll support you. Of course, you have to do something for me in exchange, and so on. So the brown dinosaur agrees, and what this actually means is that the brown dinosaur grants the support move. So this might be boring if you're familiar with diplomacy, but in diplomacy, supporting is explicit, which means we can know when it happens, and this is why we draw a little F there that shows that in the ongoing green bar, that's the friendship between the two players, there has been an explicit mark of support that reinforces their friendship, right? Thanks to this support, the green dinosaur manages to occupy the new territory they wanted, and all is well, and the game goes on, and the two players are still friends for a while, until at some point Brown decides to move into Warsaw, because why not, right? This is a betrayal, and in the language of the game, it's called backstabbing. The reaction of the green dinosaur to this, after not seeing it coming and being forced to retreat, is a message full of scorn and regret, and essentially the green dinosaur says, curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal. And sure enough, afterwards, the green dinosaur retaliates, tries to get revenge, and their friendship is completely broken at this point, all right? So this is not a one-off event. This is a common game dynamic in diplomacy. So we have a good setting in which we can find messages between people as betrayal approaches. So can we formalize and make this a bit stricter in order to actually build a data set that we can study, right? We need to identify all the betrayals in our data set so that we can analyze their language. And after wrangling these things for a while, we found that the following kind of strong constraints give us a clean enough thing to analyze. Basically, to know that we're looking at a betrayal for sure, we want to look at a solid friendship, which means it's established, which means the players support each other at least twice over a period of time. And it's mutual, which means not all of the helpful initiatives come from one player, but it has to come from both of them. And we know that it's a betrayal if it's followed by at least 2 offensive moves, and the first one who attacks the other is going to be called a betrayer, and the other one is the victim, right? So we found 250 such sequences of various lengths in the data set, and in order to study them and to compare them with something, we built a set of 250 matching friendships, by which I mean they are aligned in terms of length of the sequence and kind of position in the game time, early game, late game. So we're sure we don't get confounded by game time effects. But in these matched friendships, there is no attack ever until the end of the game, right? So these are friendships that do not deteriorate into betrayal. So we have these two things side by side. So we want to study betrayal. We're going to look for linguistic signs of it, but only while they still act as if they're friends, right? This is in order to make a problem interesting, useful, because if they already started attacking each other, it's no use to predict it. It's too late, right? This is important because it means the betrayers are trying to hide what's going to happen, and by virtue of how we constructed the data set, the victims didn't see it coming because they do get betrayed. Otherwise, they would have avoided it, right? So the core insight, the main idea that we're going to use to tackle this comes from the fact that friendships and alliances aren't in a vacuum, but they're surrounded by a context, and they react to the outside world in certain ways. And if you take affect, for example, or something like sentiment, we can imagine that a tightly knit, strong friendship is going to react positively to positive events, negatively when bad things happen to them, and this is going to happen in a tightly knit, balanced way. But when somebody decides to betray, that person is going to have their own interests, and it can lead to this kind of differences, right? This idea of balance has actually been seen before in couple counseling and marriages that get divorced. It turns out that marriages that do get divorced show imbalance, while stable ones are balanced. And this has also been applied to management and pair programming teams, which work better when there is balance across several attributes. Can we move this to our field and apply it to linguistic features and conversational attributes? So let's see what happens. We're going to first look at sentiment. And we're going to look at imbalance, which is the difference between how much positive sentiment one player manifests versus the other, right? And if we look at the magnitude of this imbalance, we're going to see that in alliances that end in betrayal, there is a strongly significant non-zero value of this magnitude of the imbalance, while in the controlled friendship, the matched friendships that stay friends until the end of the game, this is essentially zero. So they're essentially balanced. Now, this can come from two places. It's either the betrayer that's more positive, or maybe is it the victim that is less positive and leads to this. So we can break it down, and we see that it's indeed the betrayer that shows more positivity when betrayal is going to happen. Another kind of feature we could look at comes from the notion that in the game of diplomacy, people need to ask each other for favors, and these requests can be more or less polite. And we see a similar effect here. We see that in betrayals, there is an imbalance in the level of politeness, and again, this comes from the betrayer being more polite than the victim. Another similar thing we looked at is how much the two plan about the future, and we captured this by counting markers such as next and after, discourse markers that are used to make plans about the future. And we see a similar strong imbalance, but this time it's the victim that plans more about the future than the betrayer. And this might seem a bit odd at first, but it actually can be explained in terms of the demand-withdraw pattern that has again been observed in couples that get divorced. This essentially means that when one of the partners becomes more demanding, the other is going to withdraw, and this can lead to the end of the relationship or to the end of the diplomacy alliance, right? Summing up this section, we've seen that there is conversational imbalance exhibited in friendships that end in betrayal, while the ones that are strong and do not break down show balance. But does this mean we shouldn't trust anybody from the start, or should always be super careful? Or maybe we can take advantage of how things evolve over time, because really what we want to do in life is we want to take advantage of relationships for as long as we can, right? So we're going to look at how the dynamics change over time. And the way we're going to do this is by looking at imbalance as betrayal approaches. So I don't think I can read. So we're going to look at the horizontal axis at game turns as betrayal draws nearer, right? And the vertical axis shows imbalance. So higher up means the betrayer manifests something more, and lower means the victim manifests something more. So we can think of it as the previous plots, but stretched over time. And in these plots, we're only looking at the alliances, the pairs of players that do end in betrayal. We're going to look at the same three attributes, and it turns out that if we go back far enough, and if betrayal is far enough in the future of the pair, then they essentially look balanced, just like the controlled, the matched friendships that do not end in betrayal look. What happens to positive sentiment as betrayal draws nearer? Well, we see that it stays balanced. Even 2 turns before it stays balanced, but at the turn that precedes the very last friendly interaction between them, imbalance becomes strong, becomes large. And again, as we expect, it comes from the betrayer becoming more positive at that very last moment, while the victim essentially stays at the same level. Now, when we look at politeness, we see an interesting curve that has a kind of odd shape. And when we break it down, what this means is that while they start off at similarly high level of politeness, the betrayer stays polite, right? But the victim, several seasons before betrayal, is way less polite, significantly less polite than the one who's going to betray. This kind of odd effect is also an instantiation, possibly, of the demand-withdraw pattern, right? We can explain it in terms of the impolite requests that the victim makes can cause the betrayer to withdraw, and this is seen in the betrayer becoming less positive and immediately after betraying. When we look at future planning, we see a more steady trend. It's as we would expect. It comes from the victim starting to plan more and more as betrayal approaches. Only in this case, we can see that it becomes apparent even 2 turns before, as opposed to positive sentiment, which only becomes apparent 1 turn before. The conclusion of this is that, well, things aren't bad from the start. They're not imbalanced early on. They become imbalanced as betrayal draws nearer, but these attributes change at different rates and can interact with each other in all sorts of involved ways, right? So these are very interesting cues. Could we actually use them to predict when we're going to be betrayed and to avoid ever being betrayed in the rest of our lives? That would be pretty awesome, but I understand why you'd be kind of skeptical about it, so am I. But maybe we can do something less ambitious. Maybe we could do better than the players did, because they didn't see betrayal coming, right? So let's try to predict it. I'm showing you two examples, and I promise that so in one of the two, the brown dinosaur betrays the green dinosaur. In the other, there is no betrayal. In the one on the left, the brown dinosaur says, "Would it be okay with you if I took Denmark? I think I'm going to need it if I'm going to hold France back." And the response from the green one is, "Hi Germany, how about I give you back Denmark next year?" In the one on the right, the brown dinosaur says, "I'm sporting you into Sweden if you want, but I suggest you move into Finland later. Cheers, Harriet Jones, Prime Minister." And the green dinosaur replies, "Thanks, I accept your help, but I will decide what I want to do with my army." Right? So again, who thinks it's the brown dinosaur on the left who is the betrayer? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, not many, like 4 or 5, I guess. Who thinks it's the one on the right? It's at least one of them. No, it's exactly one of them, sorry. Great. So this is difficult. It was actually the one on the left. Germany stabbed in this game, and we can see it was difficult for the victim. The victim didn't see it coming. Look at the reaction. Whoa, that move was sour. You've jumped out of the pan and into the fire. Things won't end well in this relationship, right? So yeah, this is a difficult task. How well could we do by using these cues while we're looking at exactly what the victims have seen, right? So we're going to toss in a few more features. We've seen that we're looking at sentiment. We're throwing in a bunch more argumentation and discourse connectors. We're throwing in a subjectivity lexicon and some basic talkativeness features, such as how many messages the players exchange and in which direction, how verbose the messages are, right? And we're going to look at two discriminative tasks. The first one is, are we set in a friendship that is going to end in betrayal or not, right? If you remember the visuals, these are the control friendships that are never followed by betrayal. And the other one is betrayal imminent, which means we know there is going to be betrayal, but are we in the very last season before betrayal happens, right? So does this mean, do we need to act now if we're going to be betrayed? By nature, by virtue of how it's constructed, the first task is more or less balanced. And if you consider that the human victims always said they're not going to be betrayed, then their performance is essentially a 52% accuracy and a 0 Matthews correlation coefficient. If you're not familiar, Matthews correlation coefficient is a measure of classifier performance for binary tasks that's essentially 0 for uninformative, uncorrelated responses and 1 for perfect correlation with the true labels. It's well suited for imbalanced tasks. So we also use it in the second task, which is heavily imbalanced. So we're going to look at an F1 score, which again is 0 for the players because they always respond no betrayal, and a 0 Matthews correlation coefficient also corresponds to this baseline. Turns out we can get 57% accuracy and 0.14 Matthews correlation coefficient for the first task, and in the second task we get 0.31 F-score and 0.17 Matthews correlation coefficient. What's important here is that we are outperforming the players and the chance baseline on a very difficult task. Summing up, well, the intention to betray does indeed leak through words in various ways. The way we've seen it to leak through words is by looking at the balance of a friendship. Good friendships are balanced. Friendships that end in betrayal show imbalance because one person has their own agenda that they're trying to follow. And it's valuable to look at this over time because imbalance changes in significant ways as betrayal draws nearer. Thank you very much.